Hi, in this video I'm going to show you how to create one of the first patches that I made for my Prophet Rev2. I like to call it my Blade Runner patch, although I've never really attempted to get to the exact sound that Vangelis was using in the famous movie. So I'm going to show you how to create this patch from start to finish, and first let's listen to a few examples of how I've used it before. First, some notes. This is the 16 voice version of the Prophet Rev2. For this specific patch, I don't think it's going to be a huge difference whether you have the 8 voice version or the 16 voice version. Although with the long releases on these notes, you might run into some voice stealing when you play a lot of notes at the same time. So in those examples, I was using the Specular reverb by GFI System as my main reverb, but with the patch that we're going to program, we're going to use the reverb effect on the Prophet Rev2. And at the end of the video, I'll do a very quick comparison so you know why I have a preference for the Specular. I'm attaching all the values that I use for specific parameters as notes to the video description. And I want to mention that I'm only listing the values that I'm changing compared to the initialized patch. So before we get started, I typically like to analyze the sound a little bit before I'm gonna try to recreate it to sort of pinpoint the specific elements that make this type of sound. One thing that's very apparent is that the notes have a very long attack and release. They take a long time to come up and long time to die out. There's quite some grittiness to the raw sound of the synth, and this is in part to the sound of the oscillators and how I'm modulating them, but also because I've tried to simulate harmonics by using the second oscillator to add additional notes. So the second oscillator is pitched up a fifth or even an octave and a fifth compared to the first oscillator, and comes in a little later, and see if you can hear this, see if you can recognize this specific sound. Finally, the sound of this patch is quite wide, and this has to do with the ways I'm modulating the pitch of the oscillators, and of course by using effects like the reverb. So I've come up with 3 chapters to this video. The first is going to be about the basic sound. The second part is about making it more gritty, and the last part is about making it wider. So here we go. Alright, so we're going to start off with the initialized patch, and on the desktop model you can use a shortcut to do this by holding LFO1 and LFO4 and pressing hold. So now we have just a simple saw wave. So to start, we're going to switch the first oscillator from sawtooth to triangle. And the triangle shape is quite an interesting one on the Prophet because by default, when you have the shape mod set to 0, it's quite a mellow tone. But as soon as you start turning the shape mod, the sound gets a lot grittier and almost sounds distorted. So we're going to set this at 50%, and we're going to start modulating the shape mod for the first oscillator using the first LFO. So we'll hold the LFO1 button and twist the button for the shape mod. We'll leave the LFO1 shape set to triangle, and for frequency we're going to be using 24, and for amount we'll use 64, which is 50%. Let's listen to what this sounds like. Now you can try playing around with some more extreme values for this modulation, of course, and let's listen to what that might sound like. Or maybe use a different frequency. But right now we'll leave it at this. Next, let's look at how we can achieve this long attack and release. And this has two parts, the amplifier and the filter. The envelopes for these basically both have the same settings for its attack, decay, sustain, and release. We'll start with the amplifier. So we'll set the attack to 86. The decay to 127. The sustain to 46. And the release to 116, which is very long. And now it will sound like this. So as you can hear, the sound rings out very long, but we're gonna change that a little by using the envelope for the filter as well. So we'll start by setting the cutoff to 0, and we'll have the, so we can hear the effect, we'll set the envelope amount to its maximum value, and then we'll use the same values for attack, decay, sustain, and release. So 86, 127, 46, and 116. And now this sounds like this. So the reason the total release of this sound is much shorter than when we're only hearing the release of the amplifier like we were before is because the cutoff of the filter is set to 0. So we've closed the filter completely, and then by playing a note you open up the filter, and basically you combine the release of the filter and the release of the amplifier, and this results in halving the total time of the envelope, I would say. Now, right now, no matter how we play these notes, we'll always hear the same sound. But we can make this a lot more interesting and expressive by using velocity. So we'll introduce velocity and set that to 72. And reduce the envelope amount to 56 to make up for this. So what this means is that the base velocity will always be, the base volume I would say, would always be 56, no matter how hard you press the note, and then we add an additional 72, value 72 to open up this filter, depending on velocity. So to make this sound grittier, we're gonna introduce the harmonics that I mentioned at the start of this video, and for this we'll use the second oscillator. We'll set the oscillator shape to triangle as well, and the shape mod to 50% as well. Now we'll use oscillator mix to set it to 50% so we can hear both oscillators at the same time. And to get the desired effect, we're gonna tune the second oscillator up an octave and a fifth. By default, the tuning is set to C2, but we'll make this G3. There we go. And combined, this sounds like this. Now I'd also like to add some movement to the color of the second oscillator, so I'll use the same LFO1, to also modulate the shape of the second oscillator. To do this, we'll use the mod matrix, so we'll scroll to select the first mod slot, we'll hold the assign source button to select the first LFO, and assign destination and twist the knob to select the shape mod of oscillator 2. The amount we'll use is minus 127, so that it's its maximum value, but negative. And combined, this sounds like this. However, as you might remember from the start of the video, we only want to bring in these harmonics from the second oscillator a little bit later than when we play the notes. And to do this, we'll use the auxiliary envelope to modulate the oscillator mix between the first oscillator and the second oscillator. So to start, we'll set the oscillator mix at 0, so we only hear the first oscillator, and then set the envelope amount to its maximum value and the destination to oscillator mix. Now we'll have a little bit of a different envelope for this second oscillator than we had for the first. So we'll set the attack to, 92. Decay will be 96. Sustain will be 62. And release will be 96. And this is what that sounds like with the envelope amount at its maximum value, so we can hear the effect. So you can hear that at its peak, we no longer hear the first oscillator, so we're gonna bring down this envelope amount to 40. But the main reason we're using this third oscillator is so that we can have the second oscillator come in later than the first oscillator. So we actually want to delay the sound coming in, and for this we'll use the envelope delay. And we'll set this to 72. So now it's more subtle than what we started out with, but if you want to make it a little bit more extreme, you can just increase the envelope amount. Now to make these harmonics a little bit less predictable, we'll also add some LFOs to modulate the oscillator mix as well. And we'll start with the second oscillator. This will also modulate the oscillator mix. And the shape for this oscillator will be triangle. We will set a frequency of 13. So it's a slow movement, and the amount to 44. Actually, I'll use its maximum value first so you can hear the difference. So keep in mind, now we have a slow LFO also bringing in this second oscillator from time to time. So let's see if we can hear it. Actually, I'll make the LFO really fast so you can hear what's going on. I think I'll leave it at value 30 to make it a little bit faster than the 13 we had before. And for the amount, we don't want this effect to be this pronounced, so we can just reduce it to 44 again. Actually, now that I'm hearing it, I think it's interesting if we keep the LFO frequency lower, so it'll occur less frequently. And now we'll add the third LFO to modulate the frequency of the second LFO. So what this means is that right now it's just moving at a constant pace, the second LFO, but we'd like it to move sometimes faster and sometimes slower, so this effect of these harmonics becomes less predictable. And the way we do this is by selecting the third LFO, and we'll set the destination to the frequency of the second LFO. LFO2 frequency. And the shape we'll use is random. So this will generate a random value for every LFO cycle. We'll set the frequency to 19 and the amount to 30, but I'll set the, again, I'll use the maximum value so you can hear what this is doing, hopefully. It's not too pronounced, but I think it adds something interesting to the entire patch. So we'll scale this down to value 30 for the LFO3 amounts. Now, one thing that I noticed while I was playing this patch is that when I'm playing high notes, these harmonics from the second oscillator are less audible. So I thought it would be interesting to change the tuning for high notes to a G2 instead of a G3, so it's only a fifth up instead of an octave and a fifth up. So let's hear what that sounds like. G2. So that sounds nice to me, but when you're playing the lower notes, this might get a little muddy. So in those cases, we would like to use G3, and I'll show you what I mean. So that's just a little too fat and too muddy for my taste. So what I decided is that I want to leave the oscillator frequency for the second oscillator to G2, so a fifth up. But I'd like to use the mod wheel to switch between G2 and G3. And a way to do this is to use the mod matrix, and we can scroll over to the mod wheel setting. So for the destination, we'll choose the oscillator frequency for the second oscillator. And by setting the amount to 24, this means you're pitching it up a whole octave. So this is what that does basically. So now when we're playing high notes, we can use the only a fifth up. And then we'll use the mod wheel to set it to its maximum value and use that setting for the low notes. So that's a lot of ways to make these harmonics more interesting, but a few different ways that we can make the sound grittier is by using noise. And the noise oscillator in combination with the audio modulation for the filter can create some really gritty sounds. So let's introduce the noise. And let's increase the audio modulation for the filter so you hear what I'm talking about. I don't want this noise to be too extreme, so I'll set the noise level to 36 and the audio modulation to 20. And this is a good way of making your sound more intense. So if you play a piece and then you want to really have this sound come in an intense way, you can play around with the audio modulation and the noise level. Okay, so let's look at ways to make this sound wider, and we're going to start by using some detuning, and we'll start with the fine tuning for the second oscillator. If we really increase this to its maximum value, it doesn't sound very pretty. But by using a low value like 3, this can already fatten up the sound a little bit. The Prophet Rev2 uses DCOs, which means that the analog oscillators are digitally controlled, and this results in very fine and precisely calibrated oscillators that have very little pitch drift. However, pitch drift can add some extra character to a sound, and to simulate this effect, Sequential have introduced the oscillator slop parameter, and we can play around with that a little bit just to hear what it does. We'll use just a little of that, so we'll set it to value 10. Now we'll use one more form of pitch modulation, and for this we'll use the fourth LFO with the destination set to the frequency of all oscillators. The shape we'll leave at triangle. The frequency we'll set to 30, and we only need a low amount for this because it gets quite extreme very fast. Now for the final steps of making this sound wider, we'll introduce one of my favorite features of the Prophet Rev2, which is band spreading for the voices. We've been listening to all the voices set to mono, but using band spread, the Prophet will sort of randomly place the voices in the stereo field. And I think it sounds nice to not make this effect too extreme, so we'll set it to 60. And we've come to the final part of this sound, which is of course the reverb. We'll switch on the effect, select reverb, turn up the mix to, let's make it big first, let's do it at 64. We want to have the reverb be very long, so it's we'll set it at its maximum value. The reverb time will be a value 255. And for the reverb tone, let me first play you a little. Now when using such an extreme reverb setting on the entire sound, a risk can be that the whole sound can become a little bit muddy. And you can tweak the reverb tone a little. For any value above 36 or 34, there will be basically a high-pass filter added to the reverb tail. And for anything below 64, there will be a low-pass filter added to the reverb. And I'll turn up the mix to its maximum value so you can hear what I mean by that. In this case, I'm gonna set the reverb tone to value 69, and we'll set the mix to around 50. Now that concludes this patch. Let's play a little. Okay, so finally I'll switch off the reverb effect on the Prophet and turn the reverb on the Specular on, just so you can hear what I like about these different sounds. So as you can hear, the reverb of the Specular can get so much longer. It's not even set at its maximum value currently. And I really love that to sort of increase the feel of this dystopian landscape that you're wandering. Anyway, that's it for this patch. I hope you have fun playing it. Please let me know if you use it in your music. Tag me or send me an email or mention me on Instagram, whatever. And if you have any questions or comments, please let me know in the comments. Okay, thanks for watching. Goodbye.